please.
To mute themselves.
I just muted everyone, so Molly, if you unmute yourself.
Recording is started. Good evening, everyone. I am Molly Wertheimer, a member of Beth Israel Temple in Hazleton and chair of today's program. This is the first program in a three-part series under the auspices of the Central Pennsylvania Small Congregations Initiative, which brings together 17 congregations from the region. The conveners of this group are the Jewish Community Foundation of Central Pennsylvania and the Jewish Community Legacy Project, JCLP. JCLP works exclusively with small congregations around the country, helping them to address their current and future needs. Today's program is entitled Life After Life, and I will say a few words shortly about our speaker, Rabbi Yossi Zylberberg. The second program, scheduled for March the 14th, is the Community Yizkor book, presented by Professor Eliana Adler, Associate Professor of History and Jewish Studies at Penn State University. The third program, scheduled for April the 20th, will focus on services for older adults with a panel of clergy and social service professionals. Tonight's program will be recorded, as you know, and will be available on the Jewish Community Foundation's YouTube channel. We'll send out a link after the program. Please keep your audio muted throughout the rabbi's presentation. You can send questions and comments through the Zoom chat or unmute yourself when invited to do so for live interaction. We thank all of you for joining us tonight and look forward to a very interesting program. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to Rabbi Yossi Zylberberg. Rabbi Zylberberg was born in Philadelphia, but he never lived there. His parents were Holocaust survivors and were Hebrew school teachers. He spent his middle, high school, and college years in Ohio, graduating from the University of Cincinnati. Rabbi Zylberberg attended Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, and received smicha in 1984 at the New York campus. Since then, he has served a number of congregations around the United States. He has also taught comparative religion, the Hebrew Bible, and Jewish studies at a number of universities. Rabbi Zylberberg is the spiritual leader of Beth Israel Temple in Hazleton, which is a small, very progressive and welcoming congregation. I'll now turn the program over to Rabbi Zylberberg. Thank you in advance for this enlightening presentation you'll give us this evening.
Thank you, Molly. And thank you all for coming, and thank this organization for hosting this. I'm going to try to get this screen share thing up. Let's see, should be this one. Hopefully there's a screen that appeared. Okay, hold it. Okay, hopefully it's up, right? Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to have to really run through this. There's so much material that is really great. I'll be talking more about some materials that people can look up either online or purchasing materials. That this is a vast, gigantic field. Okay, so program is called Life After Life, a short introduction to the topic of the afterlife in Jewish thought. I'll try to keep why we don't know this stuff to the end of this presentation. Next part, I often hear this. I've heard this from the time I was just a rabbinical student on, but it's not Jewish, Rabbi. People kept on insisting all this stuff was Hindu or Buddhist or especially Christian. I just looked at someone posting something online that basically said, isn't this just all Christianity? Well, no, Virginia, it's not. Let me just highlight a few. I'm going to be covering where these materials come from. First, the Jewish Bible, Hebrew Bible. I listed a number of citations there. We don't have time to cover all of them. The ones that are asterisk were the ones that I thought I would spend a little bit of time. Early on in the Bible, there are 10 places where it has this strange phrase, Vayhi sof el amav. He was gathered to his people. The first time this appears, by the way, people seem to be dying in the Bible a lot, Adam, Eve, other people, but they never use this phrase for that. It only appears the first time, Genesis chapter 28, verse 8, when it's about Abraham, when he is gathered to his people. Well, how can he be gathered to his people if he's the first Jew? Where are all these other people he's gathered to? Well, rabbinic commentary for centuries has said, well, basically he's gathered to the Tzror HaHayim, the bundle of life that is where all the souls are. It appears, as I said, 10 times. Where are there other stories that are a little more dramatic? Oh, how about 1 Samuel chapter 28, verse 11 through 15, when King Saul meets a deceased prophet Samuel. And there's also, quote, a witness, the witch of Endor. She's there. So how is that possible? There is no life after death. So how is Saul able to meet a deceased Samuel and talk to him? Very interesting. Moving along, the famous dry bones passage in Ezekiel, worth looking at. In the prophet Daniel, which is a book in the Bible, we have our most specific reference to life after death. If we had more time, I would read that verse. Also in Job, there's the concept of opportunities to come back from the pit 2 to 3 times. Okay, and so clearly in Job, in Daniel, in other texts of the Bible, and just to give you a historical view of this, nobody knows what the publication date of these. We don't have any copyrights. We don't have Ezra having a stamp. He copyrighted a certain date. So guesstimates are vague and always changing, but these texts were produced from as early in written form as the 6th century BCE. That's before the Common Era. So around 500-ish of that time period through the 2nd century BCE. So in the hundreds. That's when that material is produced. This is biblical. You can't get much more Jewish than that. If you say that's not Jewish, then we really, let's just go home. There are no Jewish texts we can talk about. We have other texts that are much more developed in this regard. The Mishnah, which was written somewhere in the 3rd century CE. So if you want in the Common Era, or some people like AD, because after all, he's a Jewish guy. So we should always talk about Jesus if we can. But the Babylonian Talmud, 6th century CE, and we have important texts that talk to us about a Jewish belief in the afterlife from these materials. And this, of course, the Mishnah and the Talmud are rabbinic. This is rabbinic Judaism at its fullest form. And so in the Mishnah Sanhedrin, chapter 10, verse 1, it says, all Israel has a place in the world to come, Olam Haba. And that is where we, definitely have it codified and accepted by mainstream Judaism, that there's something called a universe or a world to come. There are a lot of ways we could translate the word olam, but haba is ahead, coming, beyond this world. Mishnah Avot has this is an important text that's often studied every year by Jewish communities, individuals. Avot is an important book. It's kind of the sayings of the sages. It's in the Mishnah. Quote, a certain rabbi, he used to say, the ones who were born are to die, and the ones who have died are to be brought to life. And the ones brought to life are to be judged, so that one may know, make known, and have the knowledge that God is God, God is the designer, God is the creator, God is the discerner, God is the judge, God is the witness, God is the complainant, and that God will summon to judgment. Blessed be God before whom there is no inquiry, nor forgetting, nor respect of persons, nor taking of bribes, for all is God's. You know that all is according to the reckoning. And let not your impulse assure thee that the grave is a place of refuge for you, for against your will were you formed, against your will were you born, against your will you live, and against your will you will die, and against your will you will give an account and a reckoning before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be God. So this is kind of a very critical proof text for the concept that there is an eternal life. It's not some new agey thing that was developed by somebody, in Big Sur. It goes back from the beginnings of Rabbinic Judaism. And there are passages here, just going to briefly mention them in Talmud Ketubot. There's a account of a visit to the afterlife, Brachot 18b, 19a, what the dead know. In other words, people have talked in Talmud, have talked to the dead, and what do they know? Moed Katan, what does death, the process of leaving the physical body, feel like? There is an account from a person who had died speaking to a rabbi, explaining what it felt like to die. Then there's much more developed in this category in another text called the Zohar, which was almost as soon as it was revealed in the 13th century CE, it was accepted as canonical. It could be often seen, and for most of its history, was seen as the major third text of Judaism. Of course, the Tanakh was the first one. The Talmud, of course, was the second one. The Zohar had that type of stature. And I just have a few brief references to some of the texts. It deals a great deal with afterlife and other things, of course. 79a, when death happens, what the person experiences. 218a, 218b, we see those in the afterlife. It is an explanation of what does a person see when she leaves this world. There's a series of accounts. This is one of the most famous ones of meeting one's relatives and friends. In Zohar 1, 226a, the patriarch Jacob is joined with the Shekhinah, feminine aspect of God, and it's often said that the Shekhinah brings the deceased person into the afterlife. It's the last. There's disagreements about this. Some say that there are 3 angels that accompany her when she does this. Some say it's the angel of death. There's a number, but the Zohar speaks a great deal about that the Shekhinah is the last thing that a human being sees before they leave. Then there's a long explanation in Zohar 3, 53a, the cleansing of the soul. And this part is kind of most distinctly Jewish. Of course, a lot of these other things are clearly Jewish too, but that the soul, and we'll talk, hopefully we'll have enough time to talk about this, the soul in Judaism is much more complicated than general people know or have heard from, let's say, Christianity or whatever. The Arizal, Isaac Luria, in the 16th century, taught, he only actually taught for 3 years, but his student, Chaim Vital, recorded what he spoke about. And there's a whole book, which is the closest thing that we have to kind of the, if we have, Tibetans have the Tibetan Book of the Dead's an important text, a ritual text in Buddhism, but the Shar HaGilgulim, which was recorded by Chaim Vital, is as close as we get to a Jewish, if you want, Book of the Dead. It's a very, very, very detailed text. By the way, all of these things I'm mentioning are available in English translation. There's a wonderful website called Sefaria.org, Sefaria, not Safari, Sefaria. And it's a tremendously free resource for looking up all this stuff. Most of it has, of course, the Hebrew or Aramaic text, and also most cases, really good English translations. And this stuff is totally free. You don't have to pay for it. So there's a lot of material that's available online. But even not, there are wonderful books that one could get in English translation. These all that I've mentioned are that. If we had more time, I would be doing some readings on this stuff. Let me just jump to the next page. Hopefully that appears. You see a flame that show up? Okay, great. So as I talked about, Judaism has a very developed idea of the soul. There actually are, if you want, 5 souls or elements of the soul in Judaism. Of course, this is kind of radical stuff because, as I've learned over the last 20 years, people don't think they have souls anyway. So we're just basically just, what is it, meat bags that wander around for a while until we no longer are meat bags. But traditionally, many religions have posited that we have souls. And this is a very nice chart that Rabbi Goldie Milgram came up with. And it's kind of a nice illustration for what is the Jewish version of the soul. So, and there'll be other ones that are a little clearer as we go down as far as the names. First, we start off, and by the way, the first 3 of these, Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, appear in the Bible, specifically connected with the idea of soul. 2 of them appear in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. Ruach appears in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. So all of the first 3 are actually used as names or metaphors for the soul within the Jewish Bible. So the first one is often articulated as nefesh, as, if you want, our physical body. So our physical body is nefesh. Ruach is more akin to our emotional soul, that we, of course, all of us have feelings. And where does that kind of center? It's this idea that there's something called the Ruach, which is an overlay over our body itself. Okay, our body, which can of course respond to pain, heat, those kind of things, but those aren't emotions, really. The emotional life of a human being is this idea of ruach. Okay, the next one is neshama, and neshama is more akin to moral and intellectual development. So it's possible for instance, a dog to have a very nice nefesh, And I think most of us would agree, especially because I'm a dog lover, a cat lover, that there definitely is a ruach in that wonderful dog cat, okay? But neshama, if you've ever spent a lot of time, even with a wonderful, wonderful animal, they don't really know the concept of wrong and right, agonizing about moral choices, intellectual thought. It's nice to get a lick, okay, but that's not really a moral intellectual development. And among humans, people may not develop all of these three elements either. There are many people that are, if we look at a sociopath or a psychopath, definitely haven't developed an neshama, okay? They don't have a sense, morality is meaningless in that kind of concept. And there are often people that, they certainly are physical, they certainly have feelings, but they don't develop this neshama. And traditionally, neshama was thought to be something that was developed and came into a human at around 12, 13. That's that kind of bar bat mitzvah age. It's not just a party. I mean, that's the most important thing, of course, but that there was this idea of morality and intellectual development that occurred. If you spend time with young people, you'll notice there's a big change from 11 to 13 in most cases. So moving to the next two charts, here we have, and these come from a wonderful book, which I commend to all of you, Jewish Views of the Afterlife. This is from the 3rd edition by Simcha Paul Raphael. He's a rabbi as well from Jewish Renewal Movement. Anyway, he started out basically being a chaplain, and he became very interested and developed some of these little charts that explain his experiences and his study on the issue of near-death experiences, the afterlife, and materials like that. So let me just, if you look at the first chart, table 11.3, if you go over to the extreme right of that column, you'll see post-mortem experiences. And if you go down to the bottom of that, where it says Hibut HaKever, and this is basically when a human being dies, and this is a lot covered in Shar HaGilgulim. When a human being dies, there are it's usually thought that for 3 to 7 days, a human being is going through physical withdrawal from their nefesh, from their body. And this can be, depending on the spiritual development of the individual, it can be very mild. We had a reference in the Talmud about it being as painful as taking a hair out of a bowl of milk. It hurt that individual so little because he was so spiritually developed and so unattached to his body. He was not as corporeal as often most people are. So that takes approximately, in this Jewish kind of Book of the Dead, takes about 3 to 7 days. At that point in time, the individual then is able to detach, and then, depending on his or her spiritual development, he would go or she would go to what's known as Gehenna, which is a purification place to remove. There are two types of sins that Shar HaGilgulim talk about. One is the sin of commission, and one is the sin of omission. For the sin of commission, for doing things that are forbidden, that's Gehenna is really the area that removes those sins. For ones that are things that that person should have done, but they're not, he or she just didn't do them. Those things are not Gehenna related. That would be done basically in reincarnation, and we'll talk a little more about that and the Jewish view of that. After the soul has been purified, and this is the traditional idea that we would say Kaddish for our loved ones, for our dearly close ones, for 11 months. The tradition is it takes 11 to 12 months for this purification process to be done for even the really bad people. So it varies according to how much sins an individual had taken into the next life with them, with the other parts, the Ruach and the Neshama. Okay. Then after that purification is done, there may be reincarnation, but in most cases, an individual will go to what is known as the lower Gan Eden, and that's a realm of heavenly delights. She would be joined with their loved ones, certainly. They would be able to bask in the light of God, not the highest light of God, because that's done in the highest level, Tzor HaHayim, when the individual has either gone through all the Gehenna stages that she has to go through, which can range quite a lot, to also when an individual has gone through reincarnation. Reincarnation is a way for an individual to speed up their process of removing the various types of sins, certainly the sins of omission, the ones that were not done in the present life. People just, it wasn't that you did something bad, they just did not do the positive mitzvot. So those are, in general, the levels of death in Judaism. I'm going to just try to skip down to another level down here, table 11.5, that should be on your left here. This is really tied up a great deal with what we often think is just, we know these are Jewish, but what possible purpose could they possibly serve? These things were not just invented by Jews because we wanted to give a chance for us to get together to eat. Shiva was, as it says here, goes to the issue, this is on the lowest part here, during that dying process and then the separation from the physical body. The individuals who gather for Shiva can actually aid that person through their prayers to achieve this stage faster, quicker. If people don't do Shiva for their deceased, then it may be harder for them to go through that process. Up here on the next level, there is the emotional purification and the final completion of the personality. That's when the parts of the personality may very well be conjoined again, the various parts, not the nefesh. Remember, nefesh is a body, and the nefesh remains in the ground. But the ruach, the neshama, can be fitted together again if they are to go up to Gan Eden, or if they're supposed to be reincarnated, they're fitted together at that time. And that's follows the issue of Kaddish. So during that period where we mourn for our loved ones and say Kaddish for them, we are trying to help the process of purification for them, so that they will be able to then fit their souls together. The next part, and for a lot of us, especially in modernity, yahrzeit has really fallen off greatly. We haven't, people like to, okay, make sure that their yahrzeit lists, but even in, when I was starting out as a young rabbi, you would have people that would definitely show up for their relatives' yahrzeit. It was a big item. Now, as long as they know it's on the list, they're good to go. They don't come around. But the yahrzeit actually in a mystical form helps every time that we say yahrzeit for our loved ones through the years. Definitely during the times of the year when we have yahrzeit, usually on the last day of major holidays, on Yom Kippur, things like that. And also, of course, the deceased anniversary. Every time we say yahrzeit, according to Jewish mysticism, we raise the spirit of our deceased relative up a notch through the various stages, up to eventually being with God. But it's in stages. So it isn't like, okay, yeah, I did it for 1 year. Okay, great. Or yeah, I do it whenever. It actually is a process where we continue to do things for our deceased loved ones. It's, by the way, there is really it's kind of neat because in Jewish mysticism, yes, yahrzeit is remembering and maybe doing this mystical practice, but our deceased ones actually still care about us and can intercede in our, when we need help. I kind of think of it as that wonderful song from years past, Wing Beneath My Wings. If you remember that, some of you are probably old enough to remember that. Sometimes there is something that comes that seems to be elevating us more than our personal, we don't have any energy. And then suddenly there's this warmth that comes. Well, what is that warmth? There's a concept in Jewish mysticism, and it's in Shar HaGilgalim, that there's something called an ibor. And it's much like in Buddhism, the bodhisattva concept, that an individual has, he or she has the ability to go on to the next world, but she remains to aid people. And an ibor in Judaism is that it can turn into a malevolent force, this idea of Dybbuk, but I'm not going to be talking about Dybbuk right now. But the ibor is a soul that is an enlightened soul that has gone through all the purifications, that is just benevolent and wants to help people who need help to improve themselves. It's, could be seen as almost a guardian angel, but that's something else. But, it's really a wonderful concept. And then, of course, we have, Yizkor here. And Yizkor is really also, as I said, returning to, that part of our returning to the source. The end point of all of this Jewish mystical idea is that human beings will be able to basically have the fikut. They will be able to cleave completely with God. That God, of course, in many ways could be seen as this tzror hahayim, this, as Simcha Paul, so Raphael's called it, a pre-womb. That God could be seen as this womb of all life. I know we often think of God as male, but Jewish mysticism certainly does not see God that way. So this idea that God is the source, really, and the bundle of life, and that we would be able to be joined finally with that, which is also indescribable. Even the attacks they're just metaphors to describe things. Now, I do want to mention a few selected books just in passing, and we'll go back. The books I have here, I hope they're all visible, selected recommended books. I asterisk 3 of the most important ones. All of these are great books. Realms of the Human Unconscious, I'll be saying a little more about Dr. Stanislav Grof, not a Jew, okay, but a psychiatrist. So he's a doctor, okay? So that's honorary Jew, isn't it? All doctors are Jews. Okay, unbelievable, mind-blowing book, tremendous text. A book also written by a non-Jew a few years ago, Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani. Some of you may have read that. It's been quite popular. It is about an individual. It's a first-person account of her near-death experience. I read the book. I was bowled over by a really wonderful book. I expected I would read a whole bunch of takedowns because the things that are in that book are mind-blowing. And I was sure that somebody would say, she's a fraud. I know, blah, blah, blah. No criticism at all against her book. Crickets are really important because when people can't say anything bad, and gosh knows they try, they just don't say anything at all. But this book it's very short, very readable, unbelievably great. And of course, I've mentioned a few times, Jewish Views of the Afterlife by Rabbi Simcha Paul Raphael. Somebody who really in the Jewish world really was groundbreaking. There were earlier books written, but I think his book was, he's written now 3 versions of it, groundbreaking. Now let me go back a little bit. First, why don't we know these things? We don't know these things overwhelmingly, not because they were not available in English, although many of them weren't, but our ignorance about this, and I let me just share that. When I went to rabbinical school, we never had a single talk about any of this stuff at all. Never would come up at all. All of this was not because the texts were unknown. They were intentionally hidden from the vast majority of Jews. Why? The Enlightenment, 1685 through 1815. This time period was the rise of science. Most of that stuff could be really considered really great, but much of it also was the creation of what we are still heirs to, scientificism, a belief that science, if science didn't prove it, it wasn't real. And so much of the religions, certainly in the West, dovetailed with everything that the Enlightenment said. There were a lot of things that were just considered old-fashioned, medieval, not true. If they were in the traditional texts, they were passed over quickly or said, well, this is how ancient people thought. We, of course, are much more developed. And this leads not only to the death of God, but the death of the soul. However, just like God and the soul, if something's dead, it doesn't stay buried. And this stuff rose up. How did it rise up? So this is in this part there where it says D, the rise of NDE. That, for those of you who don't know that term, it's near-death experience. There was an important book, Death and Dying, written by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in 1969. She was the first person that basically tried to codify how we could deal with the issues of death and also those individuals who were in mourning for people that died. Amazing work that she did. 1975, Dr. Raymond Moody, who also was a doctor, wrote about the number of near-death experiences. And people turned to Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and said, did you know about this? And she said, well, yeah, I knew about that, but I didn't want to say anything because if people found out that there was life after death, they might commit suicide. So she didn't write about it. She didn't really write anything significant until way after Raymond Moody had written, Dr. Raymond Moody had written his book in 75. I mentioned Dr. Stanislav Grof. He did, his book came out in 1975. It showed, it proved what people had theorized, Jung and others, about there being something beyond this material world. He was able to clinically prove that individuals had knowledge of information that they could not have known. So where did they get that information? I can't say enough about this book. Unbelievable. And Dr. Brian Weiss, 1988, he wrote other books, Jewish and a doctor. He was a psychiatrist who did a lot of work with basically regression therapy and was able to have people experience, re-experience events from their life and near-death experiences, wrote some amazing books. As I mentioned, Simcha Paul Raphael in the year 2000 wrote his first edition. Rabbi Zalman Schechter Shlomi kind of commissioned him to work in this area. And he has been the one that has brought a lot of this stuff, he's not the only one, but he's brought a lot of this stuff into the Jewish public domain so that we could actually seriously talk about that. It's a really, really tough topic because as I said, I've been a rabbi since 1984, and I would say that this topic is the least wanted or even discussed of anything that I, could ever talk about. People have really bought hook, line, and sinker this Enlightenment model of a material world. And so the purpose of life is acquiring things and experiences. And the issues of morality, the issues of something more than just my personal comfort or lack thereof, hasn't been seriously undertaken. We're supposed to be ethical, but that's just because we're good people. It's not that there is a connection with a higher power, and that higher power actually expects us to take the course and pass it. If not now, okay, some people are slow learners. They will get to repeat the course. Some, as it says, it's theorized 2 to 3 times. That seems to be biblical. The Zohar and other texts seem to believe it is more than that. Could be as many as 1,000 times. But imagine, just like with other religions, who realize that even though we may like to come back more and more times, coming back also has the problem of continuing to make mistakes, also to suffer loss, because nobody gets out of this body without some amount of suffering in this lifetime. So if we could have a goal to be actually joined with the Tzror HaHayim, if you want God, whatever that understanding is, why would we want to literally watch our loved ones die over and over and over. What pleasure would we possibly get of that? And as we grow older, and I hope our neshamas develop, I think we can reflect on what is really the purpose of human life. This does not negate human responsibility, does not negate the joy that we have by being loving creatures, but it does say that there's more than just us, our individuality in this universe. And so, this seems like a good point for me to stop and do the question part. So let's see. Noah, I think you're in charge of the question part of this, right?
Yes. You
Okay.
want to, Rabbi, first of all, thank you so much, Rabbi. There's just so much for us to process. Would you like to stop sharing?
Okay, you mean get this out of my screen, right?
Good.
Okay, so it's off?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Let's see. If you have a question, why don't you just unmute yourself, state your name and your community, and the rabbi will respond. Diane.
Hand up. Hi. I am actually, I participate in the Hanover Hebrew congregation at High Holidays. I bounced around from York to State College, now I'm in Pittsburgh, but I'm still a part of that congregation. And so I am reading a book called Spook, Science Tackles the Afterlife by Mary Roach. If anyone's heard of that. And it talks.
Diane, you're muted.
Okay, I put my phone back on the stand and tapped it. So the first chapter talks about reincarnation of a little boy, well, in a little boy of a man who died in India. Subsequent chapters focus on the process of the soul leaving by measuring the weight of the person immediately at death as the soul leaves, but it's just like impossible. And that was over a couple centuries, I think, that it was done. It's very interesting. And, you know, she's not taking a side. I mean, it's just, they're trying to show proof of things, but I can also say that I myself, back at the beginning when we were talking about, well, I would just say I feel like I've been visited at times by my mother. While she passed, I think she passed to me as she died, and she came to me once on Rosh Hashanah when I was preparing dinner. And I mean, I don't know whether to believe it or not. I don't, you know, care so much. I mean, it's not that I don't care. It doesn't matter to me whether it really happened or not. I feel it happened. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's really you know, thank you for that. You know, a lot of people, in my experience, they won't say these things. You know, I've often been taken into a corner, and you know, somebody will tell me something, or you know, say, I think you're the kind of person that I could say this to. I can't tell anybody else. They'll think I'm crazy. And as a rabbi, I don't want to get too much into autobiography, but as a rabbi, I started to experience things not like you have, for instance, but I've spoken to people who have, and I've experienced things that just, this is not what I was told was real. Something strange just happened. This does not make sense. And that's kind of where it opened it for me. I've spoken to a number of people who've had near-death experiences, and they can tell me in great detail information about what happened in the room when they were supposedly clinically dead. So how come they could see and hear these things? They could hear things in hallways that they couldn't possibly hear because their body was not in the hallway. So how did they hear these things? How were they able to see things which they could not see because they were clinically dead? Okay, and so it's made me, you know, I hate to say this because rabbis shouldn't be believers, but made me a believer that there is something, something beyond this. There's something beyond this. What exactly it is, you know, that's one could argue. Okay, but I really believe. Well, thank you for sharing.
Rabbi, is there a concept in Judaism dealing with reincarnation?
Oh yeah. If I had, you know, if you look at that stuff on the Arizal on my thing that I had up there, the whole book spends a great deal of time. I got that book right here if you want to rehear some stuff, but it talks about the purpose of reincarnation, why reincarnation versus just simply Gehenna, which is the purification process. Shouldn't that purification process be enough? Well, reincarnation apparently speeds the process up, and also is part of the process of doing the positive mitzvot that the person, it's not doing them is not a sin, but it's not a good thing either. So if the person didn't do the positive mitzvot, then she has to come back and do them before they can advance spiritually. And that may be the purpose, according to the Arizal, for reincarnation versus just Gehenna, which is removing actual sins of commission.
Thank you. Ronnie Cook and then Richard Rockman.
Hey, Ronnie, I'm from Chambersburg. We have several people here with us today. I was curious if there's any connection between dreams and this whole process, especially dreams where you actually dream about something that is going to happen and then it happens, or you're visited by someone that's died. Has there been any research on that?
Well, in Judaism, there's quite a lot. Dreaming is considered, I think it's called like 1/50th of death. And so when you're dreaming, you are getting information. And the analysis, I mean, there's a lot of books in Judaism on dreaming and dream interpretation. That's not really, you know, wasn't what I prepared for tonight. But there, you know, I have at least 3 or 4 books on if you want Jewish dreaming.
Right.
And there is, you know, in the Zohar, there are, in the Zohar and in the Arizal, there's more of a thing that the dream is more like a waking dream. So it's totally vivid, it's totally detailed, but clearly the person probably was asleep, but in this kind of area between. Okay, so it's more Judaism is a lot more complicated than has been you know, given in our Western way of looking at things. There's a lot of things that don't fit into basically what Christianity reframed Judaism to look like, and which so many Jews were perfectly willing to accept because it might mean survival. If we dumped a bunch of stuff that they didn't like, maybe they'd like us. You know, but we have a very complicated, and I was spending a lot of time online with people from other countries and other cultures, and so it's kind of interesting. There's a bunch of work that's being done. There's a book that's coming out in the next few months on what might have been the contact between Hinduism and Judaism in the ancient world. There isn't a lot of information, but the more research being done, we're starting to see that there may have been contact. There's mention in the Zohar of contact, but there hasn't been any real solid proof. But you know, it's so amazing that there is so many similarities for groups that supposedly could not have known each other or had communications. So
Thank you. Richard Rockman and then Beth Israel Bloomsburg.
Thanks very much, Rabbi, for the in-depth
hey, Richard, I
presentation.
recognize you.
I know you do.
Hi.
I'm from the same city that Rabbi Yossi is currently rabbi in, only I am a member of the other Jewish institution in town, Goodis Israel Congregation. Neither of which I might point out are in central Pennsylvania, but we're in the Northeast. But I'm happy to be here. I follow the tradition of doing my best to say Kaddish during Yortzeit for my loved ones. And I also follow my mother's tradition of saying prayers to Hashem after lighting Shabbos candles, and in my prayers, praying for those same loved ones. I'm wondering, with the concept of Gilgul, with the concept of reincarnation, you know, we live a lot longer now than we did in the days when rabbis were formulating these ideas. Is it possible that the souls I'm praying for are no longer ascending or need those prayers, but are in fact back here again? And if that's the case, perhaps when I pray in that manner, they are feeling that wind beneath their wings here on earth. And just a thought that occurred to me when you were speaking. And thanks again.
Hey, thank you, Richard. Yeah, the goal is to be in the bundle of life. Okay, in other words, to end this. This is a reform school. Okay, we're brought into this place to basically make to improve. Okay. Some of us know that or have intimations that we may have been reincarnated. Some of us might be new souls, okay? And but the goal is to, Gilgul reincarnation is really to do the things that we did not get a chance to do in the previous life, okay? And so, those people that are, if you want, reincarnated, or that's not a Jewish word. Gilgul is certainly Gilgul Nefashot. Reincarnated souls are here to do the positive mitzvot that they were unable to do because they either chose or didn't do them, right? And so how long is it going to take? Hopefully you won't have met too many Gilgulim, but you never know. Sometimes when you look at people say that when this isn't a Jewish concept, but I think the Arizal would have said this because he apparently could read heads. He could tell. He could tell if somebody was here before, what their work they still had to do was. He could tell when he was walking around in Safat, he could tell that this grave was this person and he hadn't done this and he died this way. And people would be shocked, how the heck does he know this stuff? But they could check it up, and apparently the Arizal was always correct in his, he could know these things. But it takes a certain spiritual adept to have that quality, right? And he died before he was 40. His whole rabbinic career was 3 years, but he lit up the Jewish world.
Thank you. Beth Israel Bloomsburg and then Rabbi Chopper. Oh, and then Bernard Pascan. Beth Israel.
This is Zeb speaking from Beth Israel Bloomsburg. Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Can you talk about this topic in terms of the coming of the Mashiach, particularly what happens or what might happen to the souls of the dead if or when the Mashiach, the Messiah, comes.
Right. Yeah, I've kind of left that part, the resurrection of the dead
That's
part.
why I asked.
Yeah. But the Kabbalists were not too keen on that. And even people who are not Kabbalists, were, they had to say it because it was sort of dogma, that there was Tiyat HaMetim, that there was resurrection of the dead, and it would happen at the coming of the Messiah, and all that kind of stuff. But the Kabbalists basically saw it as a ethereal soul, ethereal body would happen at the resurrection of the dead. Okay, but it played less of a role in Jewish mysticism than it did in, for instance, and some people, I studied Maimonides, some people felt that Maimonides had to put in one of the 13 principles is the resurrection of the dead, because, but he didn't believe it. It was just like, you had to believe it back then. So he basically put it in, but spends almost no time discussing it. And the concept of the Mashiach is, a perfected world. And that's a whole different topic. That could be easily a 3-hour thing on Jewish views of Mashiach and how it developed in Judaism.
Thank you, Rabbi. Rabbi Chopper, unmute yourself. And then Brenda, Bookbinder, is next.
Yes.
Excuse me, Bernard is next, and then Brenda. Sorry, Bernard.
Somebody got knocked off. Good.
Go ahead, Rabbi.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you to say again what's happening with the soul around the time of the funeral in light of I'm just going to share an experience that I had, because I've actually had a number of strange experiences over the years of feeling that I needed to be someplace at a certain time or a certain crucial time or connected somehow. So I had this experience once. I don't know if you know or knew of Rabbi Ira Eisenstein.
I know the name. I think a Reconstructionist movement, I believe, right?
Right. I'm a Reconstructionist rabbi. He was effectively the organizational founder of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. And one Sunday afternoon, I was home. I was in Mechanicsburg. I was just exhausted, and I about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and I just laid back on my couch, and I don't know why I started thinking about what the Reconstructionist movement would be like after he died. And then the next day I found out that he had died, and that very moment was his funeral. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering, in light of what you had said, what was the state of what's the state of the soul at the time of the funeral, given what you were describing?
Well,
does this make...
Yeah, I think it, and by the way, there's a lot of, this is not necessarily Jewish, but it comes up a lot that individuals feel something at a, they don't know, they have an unease. They suddenly have like you had, I wonder what would happen, in other words, that name or that face or whatever comes to you at an odd point, and then you find out, like, he died then, like just then when I had that, okay? And there are a lot of these kind of human experiences. And most of the time in the past, and by the way, unfortunately, these types of experiences and sharing of experiences, which were exceedingly comfortable and comforting for people pre-modernity, have been taken away from us. So people can't really mourn properly because their emotional experiences are crazy. You know, you need to take a medication. You know, when people are feeling real grief, and also maybe, as you've experienced a little bit here and sharing, you know, realizing that that person just died and you thought about that person out of the blue. It wasn't like you knew he was dying and you were thinking about him. It came to you out of the blue. Okay. Many people have experiences of being asleep and having somebody they hadn't thought about for 20 years show up in a dream and do something, and then they wake up and they get a phone call, blah, 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 died. Like that night when they had that dream. So what's going on there? This is unrehearsed stuff, unprepared stuff. And yet, it can't be true. It can't be true. Of course, it is true. Human experience, okay, tells us things that we need to listen to, okay, because there is a lot more to what's going on in life than we want to know about, you know, and science is always, you know, science is a great tool. Okay, it really is a great tool, but you don't worship a shovel and you don't try to find meaning from a shovel. A shovel has a task. Science in all of its greatness has been able to give us much information about the universe. Maimonides loved science. He thought that studying science would be able to understand the mind of God. Okay, so it's really, you know, it's not a foreign concept in Judaism, but to actually believe that, you know, I love that word. Molly will like this too. Philosophy was love of wisdom. A lot of times people say, well, it's love of knowledge. No, it's love of wisdom, and wisdom is different than knowledge. It really is. So anyway, thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
It's happened
Bernard.
to me twice, so.
Bernard and Brenda.
Story to share with you. One of my closest friends is the deacon of the Catholic Church, and he recently had heart surgery and complications set in, and he was clinically dead. They brought him back with a defibrillator, and he's doing fine now. But subsequent to the surgery and during his recovery, I asked him, I said, Deacon, I said, when you were clinically dead, do you remember having any afterlife experiences? And he said to me, the only thing I remember, it was really hot. And I said, oh, don't tell me the deacon of the Catholic Church, what the hell? I said, so we had a little laugh over that. But anyway, that was his afterlife experience, which I thought was interesting. I actually talked to another woman who had the same experience. She felt very cold when she was in that state. So just things that happened during that time. So I just thought I'd share that with you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are often people who have had these experiences have, you know, they're not always the same because we're not the same. Our experiences can be radically different. People see things in different forms. They experience, you know, there often is this idea of the tunnel that appears in much of the near-death experience. People seem to be going down a tunnel. They seem to see people that they have known in their life. You know, those things happen. You know, the cold hot thing sounds perfect. I don't think it was because necessarily the guy was, you know, but Gehenna is, even though, you know, it's not a bad place per se. It is a place of purification. It's not, the truly evil in Jewish mysticism cease to exist. They aren't anymore. Okay, there are very few of them that cease to exist. Okay, but almost everyone goes through these processes of returning to the source of life. And it's just different mechanisms to have that purification. Like I said, there's, Gilgulim, this idea of transmigration, or reincarnation, which is in Judaism. But, there's also this process of just simply being cleansed of what one literally did that was evil or bad in this world. People do that, okay? And we often have this like, nah, it's all good. It's all good. Well, some things, I think I'm willing to say, not all good. There's some things that are really not good. So how does one make up for that? And there's this concept of Gehenna, which is not necessarily purely, it's not about punishing. It is about purification.
Thank you. Brenda, and then Myrna. Brenda,
Yes, I'm unmuted. I'm unmuted, yes. Hi, good evening. I'm a child graduate of Hanover Hebrew Congregation. I grew up in Gettysburg, and I'm now in Connecticut. This is the month where I have my mother's passing and my father's passing 2 weeks apart, their yard site. But I'm also in the 11th month of my husband passing. And this is a very comforting presentation. I'm sorry if I'm going to break up. I've kind of always known that a person just doesn't disappear because they die physically. And I had a visitation of the 9th month. I had fallen asleep on the couch and I woke up to his hug. I could feel it. My other thing that I do is I've read that after you have a child, there are fetal cells that remain in the mother. And I have 3 children. My husband's DNA is in there. And so I raise my hands to do good in the world, and I carry him that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. If one goes online, one can read about a lot of reactions on Jewish views of death. And one person did mention the DNA, that our DNA, of course, continues on, right? So, and that for some people is their concept of the Jewish afterlife, that their genes literally go on. All of their genetic material and, of course, of their partner go on into that next life, and then the next life after those. And then, so, that could be seen as some type of this Tzor HaHayim, this bundle of life. If one wants to be more just biological about it, okay? But what you just said about, feeling the hands of, people, and thank you for, for what you shared. I had a congregant many years ago, very close to her spouse. It was just a wonderful marriage. And when the husband died, I spent some time visiting the wife afterward, the widow, and one day she decided she could risk something with me. This is a long time ago, this is back in the 80s. She admitted to me that the hardest thing was she had always talked to her husband morning, noon, and night. They worked together in the business together, the whole bit, right? And she had always talked to him, right? He was always on the other side of the room, and she would talk to him all the time. She said, the hardest thing, Rabbi, is I can't talk to him. And then she said, can I talk to him? And I said, sure you can. And she burst into tears because she said, thank you for giving me permission to talk to him. Okay. A lot of times we don't believe that, End of phone call. Phone was broken, no reception. Okay. You know, I think it's a great comfort for people to feel that they can talk to their loved ones and their loved ones still care about them. We often have a lot of either unfinished or finished business, but just like that concept I have here about the wind beneath our wings, okay? Our loved ones, I do not believe simply just, I could care less about them, done with that. You know, we certainly care about them. Those of us who say, you know, last night was my mother's yard site. And, you know, I've been thinking about her a lot the last few days. And I often feel my parents' presence and my ancestors, you know, the stories that I hold dear to my heart that express life guides to me. And I think that that's still something that we, you know, we moderns, just like our ancestors, need. So I'll just end it like that for right now.
Thank you. We need to close, but Myrna, did you have one comment? If you did, unmute yourself, please. Unmute yourself.
Hi, Brenda, I just want to say I'm very sorry for your loss. I had a question about mediums. I know several people who have had experience with them mainly because they were grieving and sought out whatever connection they could make for them. And it just seemed as though they were so convinced that there was no other way this person could know the things that they were told. And I just wanted to know your thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things now, I'll put back my Reform rabbi hat, but I think sometimes what the problem that mainstream Judaism had, and why, you know, people are like, well, where is the Jewish Book of the Dead? Or why didn't we have a whole book in the Bible about how to whatever? And it's because in many ways, Judaism has been somewhat a reaction to societies that had a very institutionalized kind of the whole necro world, death and contact with the dead, and how to influence the dead, and how the dead influence. You know, Judaism wanted people to be free in this world, other than the mitzvot, of course, enough there. But they didn't want to be encumbered by, you know, too much time spent on, if you want, death. They wanted them to do the mitzvot, do the actions, do the right actions. And so, you know, it says, you know, don't go to a medium, don't go to a whatever. It's constant in the text. The rabbis knew about these people. They knew what their power was, but they could have an ability to know. Sometimes somebody, you know, can be a charlatan, and sometimes somebody can be a person that is utilizing things for his or her benefit, not the person's benefit. Okay. And that's, you know, I think the tradition has enough richness that we can be empowered to do what is necessary to try to figure out what to do. And if it is truly, if our loved ones are trying to send us messages, I think we need to be open to those messages and not necessarily go to somebody to be the medium, if you want, right? The intercessor for that, because they may not be telling us what our loved one is really trying to tell us. They may be trying to figure out how to use us. There are good mediums, okay? And I've met at least one of them, and but that person was not in it for themselves. They were into helping others, but helping them, if you want, build a muscle to be able to do that, not to simply make them into junkies to pay them or give them their money or stuff like that, right?
Thank you. Molly.
Thank you, everyone, and especially thank you, Rabbi Zylberberg, for such a thought-provoking presentation. This concludes this evening's program. You will soon receive information about our March 14th program. Wishing you all a happy and healthy 2023, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you.